Welcome to Still In It, a 5-MeO DMT Journeys podcast, where I talk to real people about their 5-MeO experience. Our goal is to bring you honest and diverse perspectives about what this medicine is all about. I'm your host, Jessie, and I'm excited to have you along for the ride. So hop in and enjoy as we discuss what preparation, ceremony, and integration look like. This podcast is sponsored by Enfold, offering safe and sacred experiences in British Columbia. To learn more, visit enfold.org. That is enfold.org. Or click the link in the show notes. And now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to the pod. Our guest today, his name is Mike, and he has just come to his first Enfold retreat. How many weeks ago was it?
It was the middle of June, so it must have been give or take 6 weeks.
Yeah, okay, perfect. What drew you to the medicine?
I have been feeling for a number of years that the way that I was going about my life, just in general, maybe was not in alignment with who I saw as my, ideal self. And even to the point where I was doing these crazy things. Like, for example, if I needed to go upstairs from my office and get something, I wouldn't do that unless there was something else, some other task that I could accomplish while upstairs. So I was literally, not doing things that I needed to do unless it was super efficient or ultra efficient. And it just became burdensome. And I felt like that there was some kind of misalignment that I couldn't really uh, get to the bottom of on my own. And that's what made me reach out.
Okay, so you're feeling like some sort of misalignment or like not fully connecting to yourself. And how did you hear about 5-MeO, DMT, or Enfold?
One of my mentors was the person that first introduced me, and he had an incredible experience, life changing experience. And obviously, at the time, I had no idea to what degree. Right? You really can't understand until you actually do understand. But it was from someone that I really trust and respect, and that was enough for me to say, "Hey, maybe this is part of the answer or part of." Kind of what I'm looking for to just gain a different perspective.
Okay, before you even arrived at Enfold, had you done any other psychedelics or engaged in therapy or anything like any other modalities to help you, I guess, realign?
I would say for the most part, I'm probably what most people would consider to be a square. So I had no previous drug use aside from marijuana. Very very rarely in my life. Um, but for sure, there have been unhealthy mechanisms that I've used to try to disengage or unplug or effectively hide from reality. So I've worked with a counselor from time to time, specifically about drinking, which has been uh very fortunately for me now, I'm very grateful it's no longer a part of my life. And I think if it were leading up to Enfold, it wouldn't have been even close to the same experience, because a big part of it is you have to be able to look yourself in the mirror and not have something to hide behind. So yeah, I've some work like that, but as far as the psychedelics or anything in that light, nothing.
Before you came to the retreat, did you find that you were using any other sort of coping mechanism or, um, yeah, or any other habit that you were engaging in?
No, so that was actually one of the most interesting parts of the journey. Is it's not just the actual experience when you're there, which of course is the true unlock, is the true kind of moment of realization. But the experience really started for me about a month prior, because it's I would say recommended, if not mandated, in the prep work, that you are off of any prescription drugs, off of caffeine, off of nicotine, any stimulants like that. So for the first time in at least a decade, I was not drinking coffee. I had no nicotine, and actually medicated for ADHD, and for the first time in about 15 years. So even dating back to when I was in college, I had no ADHD medication, which was a struggle, but also really powerful. And I'm really glad that I did take that break, or had the catalyst to force that break. Because again, I think a big part of this is being able to step out of the kind of present stress, or whatever thing happens to be calling your attention. And I was, for again, years unable to do that because I was stimulated, so tuned in, so focused, kind of living in the stress. So the experience started for me stripping away a lot of the, I think, negative habits that I'd built up over the years.
What I find so fascinating is, oh, wait, from the outside at least, like, you live quite like a successful life, you're doing well, you have a partner. That like the recommendation to come and do 5-MeO DMT, which is termed one of like the biggest psychedelics you could do or into most intense,
Hmm.
came from a mentor. Was it just like right timing, that you're like, I feel the call to do something major on top of really trusting him? Or what was really like the like, F yes, I'm going to do this moment?
Yeah, I think I've actually been looking for something like this for a long time. I've always, as I mentioned earlier, kind of felt some strange kind of internal tension or misalignment. And I didn't really know what the solution was. I knew what I was doing wasn't working. And when I say wasn't working, I mean, in a way that I didn't feel like I was serving myself, right? Like still, as you said, able to be pretty successful in, my career and some other things that I have going on, but to feel like I'm able to do that without kind of abandoning, some of my values or staying true to myself, it's always been one or the other. So, and I think that's the real source of the tension and friction that I was feeling pretty consistently. So when I hadn't considered anything like this, it wasn't something that I was researching or even really familiar with, but based on my mentor's description of his experience, there was just this kind of moment where I said, yes, that sounds like what I need, because I've tried, probably just about every conventional method of trying to become recentered and, being a little bit more grounded, and just hadn't really worked because of all the habits and, routines that were built into my life.
Yeah, totally. I love when that happens. Like, you're not actively seeking it. You probably put the intention out there, or like it was in the back of your head.
Yes.
And then when it
Yes.
came, it was just like, oh, this is something I never would have encountered. And on top of having like a recommendation from someone you know and trust always helps.
That was a huge part of it. I'm not sure if it's something that I would have pursued unless someone that I look up to, someone that I find really credible and, like you said, very trustworthy, recommended it, because there is a little bit of a leap of faith, right? Because you don't know what to believe, and of course there's so much information now available to us through the internet and social media, and everyone has an opinion. And I do think, it's really good to kind of get that just comfort and confidence from someone that you'd be willing to run through a brick wall for.
Totally. I think it's like psychedelics are kind of like, yeah, we're more accepted in society, but at the same token, it's more deemed like, oh, only like kind of like woo woo people or those out
Sure.
there will do it. Whereas like coming from somebody who is like successful, seems normal and whatnot, like recommending this, it's like, oh, suddenly it normalizes the experience a bit. You're like, okay, it's not so out there. I'm not going to be like surrounded by just like hippies at a retreat, you know?
Right. Right. For sure.
So, I think that like always surprises people, especially for working at Enfold, the amount of like entrepreneurs that actually come and very normal seeming people. At first, like I thought like only those who would seek these retreats out are quite counterculture individuals, where often actually some of the times they've never done drugs before and they come to Enfold.
That was my experience as well. I was actually really impressed with the small group that I was with, and you're absolutely right. You almost expect it to be kind of a certain archetype of person, but really it was people who, for the most part, were a lot like me, where they were leading, productive and, relatively successful lives, but just looking to kind of, I don't know, just get back in touch with something a little bit more simple or foundational, with all the stressors and pressures and everything like that that just come from, trying to make a living and, serve your family and your friends and all that. So that was another point of comfort for sure, is the group that I was with. I could relate to them in a lot of ways, even, upon immediately meeting them.
Yeah, that's great. When you arrived at Enfold, I mean, I know you met them at the group orientation before, but when you arrived at Enfold, started with the retreat, were you nervous? Because, like, what were you really expecting? And how did that relate to your actual experience of doing your ceremony?
Yeah, for sure. I was nervous. There's no question about that. I was nervous. There was, uh, candidly, a small part of me that was worried that I was gonna just go insane after, like I was gonna lose my mind. Like that would be like something in my brain would, break, or a switch would be flipped, that I would be kind of a different person after. And for what it's worth, I do very much feel like a different person after, but in the best possible way. But I do think, the 30-day prep, and even really the calls, the group like orientation calls, they were so helpful in stripping me of the expectations that I had, and to make sure that I wasn't going into it trying to achieve a, specific outcome, which would be super on brand for who I am, right? If there's not a clearly set intention and a path to get there, then it's not worth the time. But in light of how different this experience, or at least, what I assumed it would be, I tried to make sure that I just arrived with the intent to experience it, not to gain anything or to accomplish something, which again was a pretty big kind of step change for how I usually operate.
Yeah, yeah. And then for someone who's never done psychedelics before, how did the actual feeling of being on 5-MeO DMT feel and experience for you?
Oh boy,
I
I
know it's
could.
hard to put into words.
It really is. I could talk about this for a very, very long time. It's just this pure feeling of like not just joy, but it's the feeling of feeling. It's emotion, right? And it's really the way that the ceremony works. Of course, is they don't just kind of push you off the diving board and you're in. You kind of work you up to the larger doses, and that was really helpful too, because you can kind of get a sense of what maybe you're about to experience. So at first, of course, it's just very light and peaceful and relaxed, and this, like, it almost feels like just taking a deep breath and letting your shoulders down, but like in a way that it was the first time you've ever let your shoulders down, in a way that this sense of freedom and relaxation that I don't know is accessible, in any other way. So again, I could go on about it forever, but very just pure and simple, and like unchained to anything superficial. And I don't know if I'm not sure if I'm articulating it right, but
No, I
that's what
love
comes to
it.
mind.
I totally agree. When you said like letting your shoulders down in a way that you didn't even know, like you didn't even know
Right.
your shoulders were up. And it's
Exactly.
it's like, whoa, I didn't know I was carrying all this with me. I totally get what you
Exactly.
mean. And when you say pure and simple, it just like in a way it just feels like you returned home. And like home not in like, oh, like just like, oh, this is just like the fundamental place that we come from in a way. I don't know if that
Exactly.
also, yeah, okay, cool.
Yes.
Okay. How was like integration for you? Did you feel it right away? Like immediately after, did you feel like elated, or was it kind of like, okay, that happened. I know it happened, but I'm still kind of feeling like myself, or how did it all transpire for you? And I know you're still technically in integration.
Yeah. Right. Right. I mean, immediately walking out of the ceremony room, you feel different, but not in a way that is tangible or a way that is easy to articulate. But for sure, I felt a pretty huge shift right away. And it really came down to, it was almost like I had this childlike curiosity about everything that was going on around me for the first time in a long time. And I still feel that way. Obviously, eh, well, it kind of comes and goes as you get further and further away from the ceremony, or at least that's the case for me. But you just start to wonder, as you're doing these kind of mundane things throughout your day, sitting at your desk, you're in your car, and you look around, and there's just there's just so many incredible things that we've built, and we're so privileged to have, that I think we feel entitled to and take for granted. And that really was the primary feeling that I had coming out of the ceremony, is just looking around and realize, how absolutely incredible, like, just being is, as strange as that sounds. It just gave me like an almost surreal level of appreciation for just the super, super simple things that, for years and years and years, I've just been walking by or taken for granted.
I totally agree. When you say childlike, for me, I almost explain it to potential guests that might be coming or asking. It's like you almost learn to relive again. It's like in a way that you didn't even
Yeah.
know that you weren't experiencing life. And perhaps it's the somatic element that they talk about, where it's like you're now using more of like a body sense to like go
Mhm.
through life. And then when you say it's like so incredible just being is, I totally agree. It's like your experience is pure, simple, and like back to like just like removing things. And it almost realizes like, oh, how much like the mundane experience of just even just like having wind on your face is a
Yes.
gift. So
Yes. 100%. You know, you just kind of feel things that you didn't know were possible to feel, like you didn't know you had access to. But they told me I had a pretty strong reaction, to 5-MeO. And what that ended up playing out, or how that ended up playing out, is for the next 2 weeks. So literally every single night for it was actually 15 days. I had very strong reactivations every single night, and they were almost identical every single time. Where I would wake up every single night at like 1 2 a.m. to this like incredible warmth. And this sounds strange, but it was almost like this gooey warmth. Like I could almost feel it kind of in between my fingers. It almost just felt like I was in the womb, as strange as that might sound. And that lasted for like a good 10 minutes. And my body would kind of shake, and it was almost like a twitch, but it kind of just felt like it was getting tension and energy out. And then almost immediately some fear, like after 10 minutes of that kind of warmth, some fear would creep in, and then I would have to sit with that fear for a while. Could be 10 minutes, could be 30 minutes. And it was, I mean, the fears were all things that I have probably kind of pushed away for a long time, that just kind of were making their way out, my body or my mind or whatever it was. So that was a tough part of integration. But I think, again, the way that they prepare you and to deal with that, and to say, hey, you might run into this, and here's how to go about it. And the advice that Steve gave me was to experience it, right, to not push it back down because it's trying to come back out. And since then, I do feel like a lot of very old tension, tension that I've had probably for a long time, was able to work its way out in a way that I don't have to carry it, or feel it, throughout my day, even subconsciously.
that's literally the beauty and mystery of 5-MeO DMT, because it's such a short acting trip
Right.
in the grand scheme of things. And yet it has this like ricochet after that like resets your nervous system, which they say, and you're like, what does that even mean? But it's like, it's not easy. It's not like you come out and you're like, I am renewed.
Right.
You like it takes some time, but like, yeah, like sitting in the discomfort of fear that like does live in all of us, it's sometimes easy to push it down and like ignore, will come up, and actually processing it and embracing that allows you to like get rid of it, so you have space and like newness afterwards. But 5-MeO DMT almost makes you like confront yourself with that. Like there's no more hiding from whatever you were pushing down or stored in your body.
Well, and that's 100% true. And especially at the retreat, because of course you don't have your cell phone, you're not connected to the internet, which is, I mean, that in itself was such a huge blessing. I mean, I almost wish I could just go back to that full time. But the I think the second night of reactivations, I had this like deep fear that because I wasn't in contact with my wife or my parents or my family, that for some reason I was just convinced that everyone was dead, you know, and because I hadn't talked to them. And after sitting in that for whatever it was, 10 15 minutes, you kind of come out on the other side of it and say, well, of course that's insane. Of course there's no logical basis for that fear. And I think if you just push it down and don't sit with it, then you never get the opportunity, to come out on the other side of it. You always just kind of have that fear. So I was, like the definition of fear as an emotion is, I mean, what I felt, but to sit there and experience it, I think is the only way through it, because I've just been pushing it down for a while.
That's beautiful. Yeah. Do you know if like maybe that type of fear you've had was like since like childhood, or like have you always kind of been a fear or risk adverse individual, like, or dealt with anxiety, and like, or was this something new? Like you're like, I didn't even realize I've been shoving fear away.
Yeah, so that one was new for sure, and I think probably part of it was just being disconnected, because I haven't been disconnected since the first time I put a cell phone in my pocket, right? You're always one text away. So just dealing with the fact that, like, I don't need to be one message away for the people in my, family and life to be safe and happy and all these different things, because I think we do see, connectivity as a weird, like, false sense of security. But so that was a little bit new for me, for sure. But on the first night, the reactivation was this very intense fear of the dark, which 100% goes back to my childhood. Like, I would sleep with the hall light on, door open, all that good stuff. And turns out, I haven't felt that fear of the dark in a very, very long time, but turns out it was still somewhere in there.
That's it's so incredible, like, what comes up for people after the ceremony. I don't know. A lot of times, sometimes I think psychedelics is just viewed as like the actual experience itself and less to do with what comes up afterwards. But I
Hmm.
think, like you mentioned, Stephen Austin really prepare you for that integration phase, which I think is so incredible. And when you harness integration, that's where like transformation happens.
Hmm.
Otherwise, it's just an experience, a cool experience you had, right?
I agree completely. Like, if they hadn't told me that that might happen, or kind of said, "Hey, you might deal with this," then I probably would have honestly reacted poorly to it. So, and that's, part of the whole Enfold experience is, it's not just the experience; it's the care, and the love that you get, like, while you're there. That, I think. I mean, I even shared this with my wife. Like, looking back, if I even had, like, the same exact ceremony, but just elsewhere or in a different environment or with different people, like, even that thought is still a little bit scary to me, but it wasn't scary at all because of kind of just the way that it's all set up, and, the attention and the care and the preparation and all this that are, that you have access to beforehand. But yeah, like, anyone that, if I were to, like, do this in, a basement by myself, like, that would be a very different experience.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's also, like, incredible, like, the container they hold because it's, like, they have multiple days, which almost in itself, adds to the experience. So, it's not just like, oh, a quick one and out. It's like, oh, you're actually there, and like you said, without technology, and you're there to sit through things that come
Right.
up, have the experience, and start processing it all while still at the retreat, which often is so easily to be negated when you're on your own. It's like, okay, I'll just like go chat with somebody or whatever the coping behavior might be, go on the phone or, so it's almost like this like gift that they start the integration there.
For sure. And it's funny, even because since I'd never experienced any psychedelics prior, when I saw that, part of this was a 2-day reintegration, you almost kind of roll your eyes and you're like, what is this for? Like, do I really need this? But I did for sure. I needed every minute of those 2 days, or at very least, if I didn't absolutely need it, I 100% benefited.
Yes, I think that that's so important for people to hear too, because like a lot of times it's like, especially if you're busy and you're working a lot or you have a family, whatever it might be, you're like, can I really afford to take all these days off? Like,
Right.
it might be better just to find a 1 day experience. But it's really like this like deep permission you're giving yourself. And although you may not realize why it's set up that way, it's like afterwards you're like, ah, I get it.
Yes. Like, if I had to just go back to, you know, like, taking meetings, within 24 hours of that, I mean, it would have been, the experience would have been, I mean, just a drop in the bucket to what it actually was, because of, how much time you get after to process.
Yeah. Now that you're like 6 weeks into your integration, I'll ask this question two different ways so you can take it whatever resonates most with you. But is there anything that's coming up for you, like blossoming for you, like that you're like, oh, this is new? Or is there any way that you see the world or experience the world differently than you wouldn't have if you had not done 5-MeO DMT?
100% the answer is yes. I would say that the experience has kind of colored just about everything that I would do. And many times not even, uh, consciously, or explicitly. It's, kind of under the radar, but, just the way that I interact with, my wife and my friends and my family. I think the easiest way to explain it, or if I were to try to explain it to myself, prior to the experience, I just feel so much more natural gratitude, like inherent gratitude for the things that are around me, the people that are around me. And it just feels better. It just feels good to appreciate, the things that are around you, and to stop taking things for granted, and to stop feeling entitled. And really, it's actually probably the most succinct way to put it is I feel much more separated from my ego now than I ever have. In a way where, the things in my life somehow feel so much. It's not trivial or less important, but I understand that there's so much more than the little things, but in a weird way, it makes you appreciate them more. Again, it's probably not a full thought, but I put less stress value on the small things throughout my day, which allows me to appreciate them more. Whereas before, I would see things as like, if I don't send this perfect email, or if I don't have this conversation perfectly, it's going to be the end. Where now I know that, like, of course, like, the perfect email or the perfect conversation is not really going to change my life in a meaningful way, but through that lens, I'm able to actually, perform those tasks and operate in those tasks not only more effectively, but in a way that's actually more enjoyable.
Yeah, what I'm hearing from that is the stress was kind of like anxiety, and anxiety is basically fear based, right? So it's like the melting of that fear has allowed you to be, I guess, more present and appreciative of just like the everyday nuances or things that may come up.
For sure. Yeah.
And part of that too, when you're saying like, oh, it's not a full thought, like part of this experience is that like a lot of what you'll be feeling or experiencing is like, I can't quite articulate it. It's like more of a felt sensation or a felt thing that's like so difficult to even put into words, because putting into words almost like takes away from what you're even trying to say. Like it diminishes the
Yes.
value.
I can totally relate to that because there's this great Louis C.K. bit where he talks about how people use language now in a way that's so bastardized, for lack of a better term, where they'll say like, "Oh my god, this sandwich is incredible. The sandwich is amazing." It's like, when I say it was an incredible experience, like, I mean, like, it was, perspective altering, incredible, not like, oh, that was a really good sandwich incredible. But we just throw these words around like they mean nothing, so it's very, very hard to communicate, what you actually felt, because we don't have any words that are reserved for this, feeling that you don't even realize was possible to be felt. But yeah, for sure, it's been hard to articulate. It's been hard to even, reconcile internally. But you don't have to. That's part of the nice thing is, you don't, there's no one's making you. You don't have to convince anyone that it was amazing. It just is, and it's yours now.
Totally. I love that. That reminds me of like just like language in general is so important, and like the stories we tell ourselves and things, and realizing like each word you have has a weight to it. So it's like if you get onions on your burger when you said you don't want onions, and you're like, ah, that's the worst. It's like, really, is
Right.
it the
Right.
worst? But it's like, you're saying like it's then hard to like put like, you're like, oh, but then like my like family member who died, that's the worst. But it's like, oh, but it's hard to like conceptualize the nuances or the variances between things when like you
Right.
use the same terminology.
Exactly.
That's so incredible. I didn't even think of that. Yeah. Is there anything else that you want to like maybe say about the experience or anything?
I guess the only thing that comes to mind, is I do feel I have access now to this new emotion, and it's very strange. But this new emotion that it's the feeling of stillness almost. And it's again really like, I can't quite put into words, but every now and again I'll feel this thing that I've never felt before in my life, and this full body like calm and stillness. And it's very similar to what you feel, during the ceremony. But it almost just feels like a sixth sense, because there are certain, words or people or things or whatever it is that kind of incite this emotion, but before you wouldn't have thought twice about it, so yeah, I guess that's the only thing that I would share, is just it kind of unlocked something, a perspective that, again, I just don't think is otherwise available.
Yeah, or it would have been able to even like appreciate or access. Like I think that's the
Right.
paradox of psychedelics that I've mentioned before in other podcasts, which is like psychedelics almost make it easier to access those states, even if you try to do like a somatic practice or an embodied practice, as they say. If you've never felt that state of like connection before, it's almost not impossible, but very difficult to like feel those feelings. But now it's like, oh, we set the expectation. You felt it before. It's like, how to kind of like rein into that feeling, you know?
Yeah, I think that that is exactly what it is. Is when you experience it for the first time, you kind of create a pathway to it, and then that's kind of now lit up for you. Like you know that that's there, and yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. You don't have to share if you don't want to, but has anyone noticed a shift? Like maybe your wife or anything?
Oh
Has
yeah,
anyone said, yeah? Okay.
oh 100. My best friend, the best man in my wedding, I've known him for gosh, probably at least 15 years now. Um, he said when I first talked to him, he goes, "Hey man, first of all, what's going on with you? Because it feels like you went through 3 years of therapy in 3 days." And I was like, funny you say that. That's exactly how I feel.
That's amazing. I love and okay, it's not about whether others recognize it, but it is always nice to hear from, like, others that you know and love, and they notice a difference in you as well. It almost, like, makes you feel, you know, validated, proud, and you're like, "Yeah, this is how I feel. I'm glad that it's being recognized."
And the weird thing about that too is you almost want to, recommend it to the people that you love. But in a weird way, kind of like you were saying at the beginning, you do have to be called to it. Like it has to mean something to you, that it's not just like, oh, I'm doing this because my friend said it was cool, right? It has to be, I think, a little bit more intrinsically driven, for it to really have the impact. Which I'm fortunate that, even though it came through a recommendation, it was kind of, it spoke to me in a way that I was motivated to go, not just taking, following someone else's lead.
Oh, for sure. I always have to make sure not to, like, over recommend or even, like, really say it because it's kinda like anything, when someone's ready to hear what they need to hear, like they'll hear it, right? Like you could say it a million times to somebody, a learning lesson, until they actually go through their own process and arrive at that destination. It doesn't do much to move the needle, right? So it's like
Exactly.
when they're ready, they'll feel a call or it'll come in their lap, you know, just the same way it kind of arrived for you.
Yeah, I almost feel like, at least for me, this was kind of the pinnacle of like a long development, or a long journey of personal development. And then realizing at the end of that journey that, of course, I still, we all have more to do there, but that there was something else that wasn't available just through like, reading personal development books, or, getting your morning routine straight or something like that. Like it took a long time for me to realize that there was something else that I needed that wasn't available through those, traditional channels.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder if, like, if you did go back and read any, like, you know, spiritual books now, a lot of people say that, like, oh, it's like they get it a little bit more than they did before.
I read at the retreat The Untethered Soul for the first time ever. Oh my god, I don't think it would have meant anything to me if I hadn't read it after the ceremony. But like, it just so perfectly articulated, um, how I felt, and helped me put some of those emotions and stories and thoughts into words that I could then understand and actually apply. So Untethered Soul, uh hard recommendation.
People were like, I picked up that book so many times, tried to read it, never made sense of it, or like just couldn't get into it, couldn't resonate with it. And then after their ceremony, they, you know, read it
Yes.
again, or they have there's an excerpt that comes out. They're like, oh my God, it all makes sense.
Well, I bought a copy for my wife, and she's like, "This is the book. Like, this is the one that changed your perspective on everything." And I was like, "How do you not get this?" But I understand why.
Totally. And it's so funny because I think that one it's like a bluish book and there's like a horse
That's the one.
on like a
That's the one.
beach.
Yep. Yep. She's like, "What did they do to you at this retreat?"
I like
Yeah.
I know long walks on the beach, yeah.
Right.
Um,
Right.
okay, what would you want somebody to know who's never experienced this before or looking to embark on this experience?
I would say that the more time you can spend with yourself and in discomfort leading up to it, the better. Because even though I did the prep program and everything like that, I think there was still a lot of tension, for me, that I felt during the ceremony, that if I had, maybe had more time or more intentionality around kind of unburdening myself of all that tension, then I think the experience might have been even more, um I don't know, like even more kind of elevating. But at the same time, even if, as I say that, I almost wonder if, I needed the experience to release that tension. So it's kind of a chicken and the egg. But I guess for sure, like do what you can to sit in silence, stillness, even if it's uncomfortable. Like, don't go to your phone, don't go to the social media when you're being drawn to it, because a big part of this is being centered. And I think the more centered that you can be leading into it, the more you'll benefit, and the kind of it'll have an exponential effect on that.
100%. Yeah, it's so hard to tell. It's like, oh, like if you could just sit with it a little bit more, but you're like, wait, I don't know if I could do that just because of the experience. But I think trying those things definitely helps to like prime,
Mhm.
and like also not beating yourself up. It's like, okay, if you can't, if your intention was like to meditate more or something, and it's like you just can't really get into it, it's like it all makes sense.
Yes.
I'm just curious, do you drink coffee again?
You know what? I gotta say, I am like, this is one of those things where I was saying earlier, I didn't drink it for a month. So I just started. I had my first cup of coffee literally 2 weeks ago, and I used to drink, just for context, somewhere in the ballpark. I've actually calculated it, of like 1,600 to 2,000 milligrams of caffeine per day. And what that looks like in practice is two large Dunkin' Donuts coffees and then an additional pot of coffee at home. Like, that was my routine every single day. And now, so I did, I do drink coffee in the morning, but I have one, and then I drink tea for the rest of the day, and I feel so much better. And honestly, there's like, I have this like weird shame and guilt around even drinking any caffeine to begin with, which is probably something that I have to unpack on my own. But I did go back to it, but it's very, very different than it once was.
Whoa, I love that. No, that's a huge win. And there's no shame, no guilt about drinking caffeine. I drink coffee and I work for them. And I've gone through retreat. And I went through the same, I think a lot of guests go through the same process because you know that it's a stimulant and it's like we're supposed to have our nervous system and like but
Right.
in balance, it's like, yeah, I used to be the same way. I would jolt myself with caffeine. It's like if I was still exhausted, I'd drink a coffee and I would go for a big run. But now it's like I listen to my body more. It's like, okay, I have
Exactly.
one coffee and if I need a rest day, it's like that's a huge win. And I think that's what you're doing. It's like you're just listening to your body more. There's nothing wrong with a little bit of caffeine.
For sure. And I will say, like, the first nap that I've taken in probably 20 years happened at the retreat, like midday. I don't think I've ever fallen asleep midday. Like, I don't know, since maybe, it definitely since grade school. But I've since taken, a couple naps on the weekend instead of just pounding, that fourth or fifth cup of coffee. And it's been nice. It does feel, there's something to be said about just listening to what your body is saying instead of having your mind and whatever expectations you have for the day in the driver's seat.
Whoa, I love that. I used to pride myself and be like, I just can't nap. Like it's just a thing that I
Yeah.
can't do. Like I'm like, I must be so uber productive or something. But now I love napping, and I actually find that like if I'm like really craving something sugary or another coffee, I'm like, if I just do a 30-minute nap, and just let myself rest, I wake up feeling so rejuvenated. Like sometimes I still feel a little groggy, but as soon as I get myself out of the bed and move, it's like, wow, that actually works. And I find that the melting of anxiety allows me to also take a nap. Before it was like I couldn't take a nap. I would just think about all the things that I
Right.
had to do. And it's like, yeah, I wonder if everyone else is experiencing more naps post Enfold.
Well, I think, like, even, in my day to day, my work life is bouncing from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. And it was very common for me to, go on a meeting, and then maybe I have a 5 or 10 minute break between the next. And what I would do is I'd look away from my computer screen and immediately start looking at my phone. Right. And there's no unplugging there. There's no disconnecting. And just recently, I literally have made all of my meetings 5 minutes shorter, like across my calendar. Every single meeting, there's no more 30 minutes. They're all 25. There's no more 45s. They're all 40. And I now take that 5 minutes like as time between each meeting, and I don't look at a screen. I just go up, pet my dog, like, feel the fresh air, God forbid. And that alone is massive. Literally just 20 minutes per day that I'm not staring at a screen, interspersed throughout the day, has been such a huge, huge game changer. And Steve actually gave me that advice. So thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Steve is the master of like he has he had another company. I don't know if he still has it, but Nature of Work, where it like shows about like the optimization of like work and like meeting blocks and things like that, where your brain does need a break, especially like talking to people takes on a lot of energy, especially in any type of role where it's a business role where you have to almost put on a different like facade. Even if it's as close to your normal facade, it's still a professional role. And that's energy draining. And I think taking that time to not go and look on your phone, which seems like it's a break, which is actually
Right.
not a break, it's still stimulating your brain, is huge. And I think that's like the thing that we're talking about. It's like the small changes are what's so paramount to this. And
You're totally right, because you have to context switch so quickly, and with no break, it's impossible to not bring in some of the last conversation into the next conversation. And most of the time that's not good, right. Most of the time that person deserves like a fresh slate. Well, I shouldn't say that. All the time that person deserves a fresh slate with you, and so you can have that conversation from the ground up, not holding on to any tension or any emotion from the last conversation. And staring at the phone, it just presses the pause button. It's not an actual break. So you're still carrying all that same, tension, stress, emotion, whatever it is, into the next conversation, but you feel like you got your little dopamine hit in the middle.
100%. And by the end of the day, or even by the end of the week, it's like your body is exhausted. Like, your brain
Yes.
is also utilizing so much of that energy. And it leaves very little space for people that matter in your life, like your family or your friends, where like they also deserve a fresh slate, not just your customers. But by the end of the week or by the end of the day, it's like it's hard to be 100% present when you're kind of burnt out from being stimulated all day.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, well, thank you, Mike. That was amazing. I really appreciated the conversation. It was actually really fun.
Glad to hear that. I am, just so you know, my plan is to do a 1 year anniversary trip. I think, I'm already planning on going back. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But I I have been trying to take my own advice to do that kind of uncomfortable sitting in silence, sitting in stillness. And I think, next time, I'll be able to kind of build on the first experience because of what this one unlocked. And I'm excited about that.
Oh my God, it will. I think anyone who's come back for a second time, which I think we have a handful of people, it's happening more often, I think. Not in a way that like, oh, they didn't get any healing, that they come back for another one. It's just like it it's almost like you did a huge amount of healing, a lot of things came out, like whatever, but there's still something just like left. And for other people, I think Austin explains it's like you just come back and you just like grab whatever you needed or like remove whatever you
Right.
needed, and then it's like that perfect little refresh. So I hope you do come back. And it would be interesting to hear how your second time went.
I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the Still In It podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're interested in hearing more, the best thing you could do is to leave us a review. This allows us to continue to record and inform others on the 5MEO experience. If you want to join our beloved community or learn more about us, feel free to visit us at enfold.org. That is enfold.org.